Okay, we are recording to the cloud and live on YouTube. It is 1:05. Oh, sorry, it's 1:05 here. It's 4:05, sorry. So thanks everybody for being here. We are at meeting number 19. I'd like to get, the last few months, we really haven't had a quorum, so we've just been taking meeting notes, and I'd like to move them kind of off our agenda. So if somebody would like to just say, yes, the meeting notes represent it without it being kind of a more formal thing, we will be able to post them so everybody can see what's going on. So if somebody wants to make a motion to that, I will entertain it.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Paul, seconded.
Second.
By Perry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Okay, so we're moving right along. Tim Nolan is coming in as well, Jen. So I will turn it over to Francisco and we can get going with the meeting. There you go.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Well, welcome everyone to what is, believe it or not, our 19th meeting. And we have a relatively straightforward agenda for you this evening. And that is to very briefly review the discussion from our last meeting, which included a discussion about both city services and facilities and cultural resources. So we sharpened the pencil on those items, did some follow-up work, and want to put that in front of you again. We don't need to discuss in any detail, but I want to quickly review it so you can see where we landed on many of those recommendations. And then we're really going to get into the work that's in front of us, and that is developing the future land use map, of which we have some iterations. Well, I'll get into that in a little more detail once we get there, but it's a very important component of the POCD, and it really deserves our attention this afternoon. And then we'll talk about our next steps. First of all, where are we at in this process? We are, as I mentioned, going to briefly review services and facilities and cultural resources, and we're initiating work on the future land use component. Many of these areas are called out here that are in black have already been substantially completed. We still have a lot of work to do, or they're in progress, and it's the active work in the colors that's in front of you. So once again, in very quickly reviewing city services and facilities, and this was our goal from that discussion, and it has not changed. It's still the same goal. And so when as a reminder, the strategies and actions I've put in front of you have come from, there's been a long process that has brought us to developing these strategies and actions. It's all laid out right there. The first strategy is for city services and facilities, is to prepare a city facilities master plan to assess capacity to meet current and anticipated program needs, and to identify energy efficiency and overall facility improvements that are needed. And that's, we have some very specific actions called out for that are identified here on the page. And so each one of these, I will just pause briefly after speaking if anyone has any questions or comments about the specific actions. I'm not going to read all of them.
Can I just interject 1 second, Francisco, and let everybody know? And I think I copied the entire committee that I did send all of the 6 areas, components, and with all the goals and strategies and actions around to the various department heads to try to get some input early on in the process. So we did get some comments back, and I know if they're not reflected here, we're keeping track of them so that, like Ed, I know you sent me a couple, both Eds. I'm sorry, Ed and Rich, Rich Danelli, you sent me a couple of comments. So if you don't see them here, it doesn't mean that we're not considering them. It's just, we're trying to, I'm keeping a pile of all the comments, if any, and then we'll work them in as we go along. So just make sure everybody knew that's what's going on. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, I'll keep moving then. Our second strategy is to expand the capacity of Danbury schools to meet student enrollment needs, and we have 3 actions in support of that. All right. Third strategy is to continue to preserve, enhance, and maintain parks and recreational facilities. Okay, and once again, if you have a question or comment, unmute yourself and just speak up. I'll give you a few seconds to chime in before I keep going. Strategy 4, expand the capacity and services offered through Danbury's library. We have 3 supporting actions. And coming out of our last discussion.
If I could, Francis.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul, go ahead. Yep.
I don't know if you even want to put this in there, but libraries across the country, because people are, downloading e-books and whatnot, and movies are now coming on files, or adding non-periodical, non-book content to their lending systems, like even pots and pans and things like that. So maybe the library could consider branching out into some other things that could lend to patrons that are
okay. Expand
a pivot from the typical thing.
Expand range of services provided, maybe something to that effect.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Just to let them know that the city's behind that, because the library people are kind of, poking around in the dark. Vis-a-vis how we feel about them, how officials feel about them. I talk to them constantly, so I try to reassure them, but I think it would be helpful for them to know that the city was, agreeable to that, amenable to that. Thanks.
Okay. And coming out of our discussion last month, we did expand action item 3 to to explore the potential of incorporating private libraries into the system as a collective system.
Yeah, and sometimes even have like a bookmobile. I know Hartford has on Waterbury.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next. Strategy 5 is to improve resources of the city's Health and Human Services Department to ensure that Danbury continues to meet the needs of its residents. And we have several supporting actions for that. All right. Strategy 6, ensure that Danbury's public safety services have the resources to meet the needs of the community. We have this list, I should note, is actually since expanded. The police department got back to me confirming some recommendations that came out of a discussion that I had with them. So we have a few more items relative to their operations, which include they would like to expand their personnel roster up to 175 persons, which is several more than what they have now on full time. They also feel that their headquarters, they need more space. As I understand it, the building was designed with an upper floor that has not yet been built out, but it was designed to accommodate that. So they'd like to build that out to have more space. And also, they are working on an analog communication system, which is beginning to be antiquated in the digital age. And they feel that it's really important that the system be upgraded to a modern digital system. So we have a few actions to that effect to add to this list.
Francisco, were you thinking about putting that number 175 in there? Because that's really a decision that probably should not be in this. That's more like a political decision.
Yeah, and it's It's a good point you bring up, and which is why I mentioned it. That, you know, that was their number. That being said, this is more of a policy plan and not a strategic plan for hiring or anything like that. So we should probably use a broader brush in painting.
Correct.
That. Yeah. And just, so I'll be sure to phrase it as in broader terms.
There's a lot of interested parties with a lot of differing views about how we move forward with this. So,
okay, understood. Any other questions or comments about this list in front of you? Okay, let's move on. Strategy 7 is to maintain Danbury's airport in a state of good condition and make investments necessary to meet the needs of the local aviation community and support the airport's role as an economic driver. And I know we had a decent amount of discussion around compliance and FAA regulations, so I hope that we properly captured that in action item 1.
Yeah, and this again came out of some discussions with the airport administrator.
In the airport as well, correct.
Yeah.
All right. Strategy 8 is to support sustainability, including energy efficiency and renewable energy sources across all city facilities. And we have 5 action items in support of that. All right. Strategy 9, to continue to protect and maintain the city's drinking water supply and distribution infrastructure. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Strategy 10, continue to make needed investments in the city's wastewater collection and treatment infrastructure. 5 actions. And one of the biggest ideas here is the first action is to limit sewer service extensions to designated service areas.
Good.
All right. And strategy 11, I believe this is our last strategy, is to proactively work towards obtaining and securing funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act as a means of financing needed improvements to city facilities and infrastructure. All right, we know there's federal money headed towards the state and towards communities, and Danbury should really be tracking that as best they can and make sure that the city seizes upon opportunities to grab some funding to help facilitate many of the recommendations of this plan.
Yeah, and I think if I can interject for a second, Shazon, he and I may have an offline discussion about other acts, pots of money, federal at the federal state level that he knows about to broaden this strategy, because it's not just the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. It may be other sources, right, Shay?
Correct. That is correct.
Okay, so we'll work on getting back to you about that.
Good. All right. Well, let's move on. Next item, or the next goal, is our cultural resources, and there we have a very straightforward goal. I think we're all in agreement on that goal at our last meeting. And once again, it's been a long road to get to these ideas and recommendations with a lot of feedback from yourselves and others. And so the first strategy is to promote and enhance the viability of historic and architectural resources for their continued use or for new uses. Make sense? Okay. Second strategy is to restore and repurpose city-owned historic properties. And with 2 specific actions we've identified to date. And the impetus here is really, the idea is not to sit on these properties, is to get them improved, restored, and put into reuse or transfer them to private ownership so that these properties can be put to use.
Would you mind putting lease in there? Consider the sale, lease, or transfer?
Okay, in addition to or instead of?
No, sale, lease, or transfer is how I would like it
in
to
addition
read.
to, okay, yep.
It just gives us some flexibility. We do a lot of leasing, you know.
Yep.
I mean, you know, selling it to the building's gone, we don't own it, we can't control it anymore. Somebody flips it and does something else that we don't want them to do. We're kind of out in the cold. But if we lease it, then we have some, you know, downstream control. Thanks.
Okay.
Let me just ask, and I don't know if it's, I'm trying to go back and read fast, but what about, and we're dealing with this, as you know, Paul, right at the moment, about adding to our inventory cultural and historic resources, i.e. the courthouse. So we don't own it, opportunity to own it and repurpose it for something. So
absolutely. You know, I hear from people all the time, what is Danbury doing with these beautiful houses? They let them go. There's an opportunity. They're ripped down. They build a this, they build a that, and you're losing your historic. So yeah, sure.
Purpose.
And
yeah, it's not because it's not like a city-owned building to date, right. But it gives the flexibility if we want to pick up a building that's offered to us, if we determine it's appropriate and do something.
You know, I would have thought that was understood, but no, you're right. It should be in there.
It should be somewhere.
Yeah. I think anyway, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bridget would agree if she were on.
Okay. So the city should continue its practice of strategically acquiring these resources.
Properties of note, something like that.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
As appropriate.
Right, okay, we'll figure out where that fits in. All right, next strategy is to provide continued support for the protection of historic resources in Danbury with 5 actions. And it may be that one of the actions here is to continue the city's or is to strategically acquire significant historic resources as they are available. Okay. Strategy 4 is to provide more support for the arts in Danbury. We have 7 actions here. We have a lot of ideas about that.
I could just tell you, I've gotten letters from people from our last discussion about some of these actions. So kind of here's a growing that we're in favor of some of these actions. So yeah, I
Okay.
think we'll have, lots of discussions to be able to move some of this forward. That's a good thing.
Okay, good. Questions or comments? All right. Strategy 5 is to develop a marketing campaign for Danbury that features and promotes its cultural resources.
Good.
Good. Okay. Strategy 6, revive Danbury as a place that is home to events. All right.
Mhm.
Okay, that was it. We have six strategies for cultural resources. Right now, the real work begins this afternoon, and that is the future land use map and future land use component of the plan. As I've mentioned before, this is a really integral part of the plan. It's really one of the driving forces of the POCD is future land use, because it is really the foundation of your zoning, and it can be used to help guide future development and zoning and rezoning work. It can also be used as a general guide for other city policies and actions, such as preservation of open space. So this is a very important piece of the puzzle, and we want to develop this with your feedback throughout the process here. So we've done quite a bit of homework over the past month, and we now need some of your feedback and direction before we move it along much further. So first, let me provide you some examples with the future land use map, what that looks like. And these are 3 different examples from communities that we have worked in and developed plans for over the past several years. And starting at the left with something that's probably the least granular of the 3. And let me preface all of this by saying that there is no strict requirement as to the form that these maps take. They can be very conceptual in nature, sometimes like a bubble diagram, or they could be very, very detailed and parcel by parcel. The state just wants communities to be thinking about which areas, what sort of land use is appropriate in the community and which areas. And so here are 3 not completely different examples, but they do vary in the level of detail. And you can see at left is town of Woodbury, and that's pretty broad brush, identifying general density of residential areas, the lightest green being the lowest density, the darker green being higher density, as high as you could get in a rural town. And then also indicating commercial areas where apartments development is acceptable. In the middle is Monroe, more of a suburban community. And so in Monroe, what we did is we took their zoning map, and they really wanted to maintain consistency with their zoning. They weren't looking to make any big changes in the community. One of the things they were looking to do is to incorporate more mixed use development. And so what we did is we showed those areas that were appropriate, that they felt were appropriate for mixed use development along their major corridors, being 25 and 111. Those are the areas in blue. And outside of that, the residential density is shown in a very similar format as in Woodbury, lighter colors being less dense, darker being more dense. We showed industrial areas, school and municipal areas, and parks and open space as well. And then on the right is the map that we did for Bridgeport. In Bridgeport, we at the time made a decision to adopt the zoning map as the future land use map, which is something that you can do. And typically you would do that for a couple of reasons. One, if you felt your zoning was exactly as it needed to be, and you're not looking to do any real significant changes to districts, uses, or district boundaries, that would be a strategy to just adopt that as your guide for future land use, which is acceptable to the state. In Bridgeport, we had slightly different reasons for doing so. Through the course of the plan development process, we had identified the fact that the city desperately needed to do a complete zoning rewrite and overhaul. And that process would afford more in-depth analysis and discussion surrounding what land use should be and how districts should change. And so basically what we decided to do is to kind of defer to that process, which the city has actually since gone through and adopted new zoning. And so we adopted their zoning map as the future land use map with a note that it should be modified in concert with their rezoning work. So all three options are at our disposal. We can be very broad brush. As in Woodbury, we could be, if you feel your zoning is exactly where it needs to be, which I would be surprised if you told me that, we could be very prescriptive as in Bridgeport. So with that being said, let's get a little further into it. We've started this process by coming up with a few categories that we think we should start working with. And this is kind of akin to, I'm going to ask you to think back to when you're in kindergarten, you're put with the, the black and white drawing in front of you that you need to color in. It's a lot easier if you're using the box of 8 colors than the box of 64. Right? So we're trying to simplify this process to make it a little more coherent and also to give us more flexibility, and by not being over prescriptive. We're going to go with a simple color palette here, and which represents really a simplified land use. And within that, we still see there's still some nuance and variance here. We have 3 categories of residential, which are commensurate with density. We have a couple of different types of commercial, and I'm going to walk you through these one by one in a moment. We have different mixed use areas. We have a west side mixed use area downtown. We have industrial areas, institutional areas, open space, and then some very important overlays related to flood zones and aquifer protection areas. So these are going to be the building blocks, or our crayons that we use in developing this process. Now, let me walk you through these one by one, and this will afford us an opportunity for me to explain what our thought process was as to what these areas mean, and then also for us to get some feedback from you as to whether or not you feel these descriptions are adequate, appropriate, whether they should be reworded, expanded, whatever it may be. So let's start with rural residential. I think we expect that a good part of Danbury, maybe at least a third, will likely be classified as rural residential. And that is going to start with your large lot, single family districts, such as the RA 40, definitely the RA 80. And this description within the plan, we will provide a description of what this means, and it's going to be it may be exactly as it is worded in front of you, or an iteration thereof. But rural residential, as we describe it, are areas where preservation of open space is the top priority. Secondary to that is really the residential land use. So single family homes are present and allowed on medium to large lots. And the idea here is this is a means of preserving, protecting large amounts of open space in Danbury by having that open space be really a prominent feature of the landscape, with the houses secondary. And if you think to some of your least dense, more rural areas, that's exactly what they are. You're driving through nature and there's houses scattered throughout, rather than a little bit of nature interspersed between houses in a dense neighborhood. These areas are often located outside of your sewer and water service areas, and they tend to have limited transportation options, right? There's very rarely are there sidewalks. There typically aren't any bus line servicing these areas, and that's the general expectation. So the way the future land use map can not only support zoning, but also policy, is that if you have someone requesting transit service out to these areas, you know, one way of rebutting that sort of request or inquiry would be to say, you know, these are areas that we, based upon the purpose of these areas, the density, the land uses, we've already identified these areas as not being a priority or not being suitable for transit. And that's how the future land use map is used in a number of policy making ways and supportive decision making as well. All right, any questions about this? And all this might start to make a little more sense to you as we run through all of them, so we can come back to one of these individual categories if you like. But before I move on to the next one, any questions or comments? Okay. All right, neighborhood residential. These are areas that are going to be really comprised of your existing zoning districts and existing neighborhoods that are small to medium-sized lots, primarily single-family homes, but with some multifamily homes as well, 2-3 family being more typical. You know, these are areas where you're driving down the road and you're definitely in a neighborhood. Your houses are fairly closely spaced. They're more likely to have sidewalks. They're most likely served by sewer and water. It doesn't not necessarily, but they have a higher likelihood given their location. And they're also more likely to be served by some form of transit, to be walking distance to a bus line or train station or whatever it may be. Okay. And high density residential. High density residential is primarily comprised of multifamily homes. So it could be, you know, 3 family homes to mid-rise residential buildings. You know, Kennedy Flats, we would consider that probably a high density residential area. You know, as we start to talk about the downtown, it's very likely that that's actually part of the downtown area, but that type of development, that scale of development, we anticipate would also fit into what we're categorizing as high density residential. These areas are you know, located entirely within sewer and water service areas, and they typically do have transportation options, including sidewalks and access to transit service. All right. Neighborhood commercial. These areas are comprised of small clusters of commercial uses, typically surrounded by residential uses, and they're often typically oriented around an intersection, and very often retail, maybe a little restaurant, market, some services, tiny little offices, but they occur in little clusters throughout the city. And we, I think, are unlikely to identify new areas where neighborhood commercial would be appropriate. Rather, this is just acknowledging areas that already exist and, you know, ensuring that those areas are acknowledged and not labeled as strictly residential, which would suggest that we don't want those areas there anymore.
They can be near and dear to the hearts of a lot of neighborhood people, I hear.
Yeah.
People who've grown up in Germantown or Worcester Village or something like that, who remember that very fondly when they were a kid getting an ice cream or a soda or something like that. Yeah, I don't think we have any interest in diluting those or getting rid of them.
Right.
I think we would have an interest to the contrary of improving them. I know Worcester Village about 20, 25 years ago got a grant for new sidewalks and bollards and things like that, spruced it up.
Okay.
And it was very helpful and very well received. I think we call them, Sharon, CN5s, is that what they are?
Yeah, there's some CN5 and CN20.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically
Yeah,
out by the
great.
lake. There's, by the lake, but Worcester, Worcester Village.
Right. They're very convenient for people. You don't have to use your car. You just walk there, you know.
Yeah. So we want to acknowledge the importance of those by identifying on the map, even if they are little clusters, we would want to show it on the map and not gloss over those areas.
Right.
Okay. Corridor commercial is your most typical type of commercial, and we call it corridor because they really are, they line some of your major arterial corridors. And they are almost exclusively located within existing sewer and water service areas, and typically served by a range of transportation options, you know, obviously on primary thoroughfares for automobile travel, but they're typically accessible via sidewalks, typically have transit, you know, whether in proximity to the rail station or, you know, what more commonly would be a hard bus running by them. Okay. Downtown mixed use is basically the downtown, right? We acknowledge there's a range, a mixture of uses, and that the plan is supportive of a mixture of uses, including commercial, institutional, high density residential as well. And along those same lines, the west side, which is really representative of the planned neighborhood development district, which enables those mixed uses, but your other major mixed use category and area would be over on the west side, or including the summit, including and surrounding the summit. Next is industrial. And that's basically all of your industrial zones and districts. We know the city's very interested in preserving industrial land. It doesn't have a whole lot of it. And so we want to identify those areas as industrial so that we're ensuring to recommend that those areas continue in an industrial capacity in the future. And these areas are almost entirely located within water and sewer service areas and you know, served by arterial roadways, state highways. Institutional, and that includes schools, the university, FCI Danbury Hospital. These are big institutions, and the value of identifying these areas as institutional, even though many of these uses are located in a different type of zoning district. By example, a lot of your schools are located in residential zoning districts because you put a school, the city can put a school wherever they want. I even think a West Side campus, I think that's a zoned residential. Sharon, am I correct in saying that? I think
yes,
it's zoned residential. Yeah.
Yeah, RE40.
The value of instead of just kind of adhering to whatever the zoning says for that area and just mapping these areas as residential, is to acknowledge those campuses, and really mostly we're talking about campuses here, are really important to the fabric of those areas, important to your culture and your economy, and that it may be very disruptive if some of those uses were to change. You know, just to throw out an example, not saying that this would ever happen, but, you know, what if Western Connecticut decided it wanted to be entirely on the west side and it wanted to pick up shop from its White Street campus? You know, that the future use of that property could be very disruptive if it were to go to some other type of use. And you would want some sort of framework in place to encourage that property to continue its use as in an institutional capacity. And that's what the future land use plan would help guide you in that case and occurrence. You know, practically speaking, these institutions don't change a lot. They're you know, they're going to probably be there for a long time, which means it's also pretty safe to just identify those areas as institutional uses because it may just be a non-issue. And next is open space. And what we can do here is really to afford open space even more protection by also mapping them in the future land use plan. And so here we have parks, open space that's being held for preservation. We can identify properties that are deed restrictive, that we know are held by land trust for the purpose of preservation or protection. And this just one more form of protection for those properties to identify them, not only in their current use, which we will be doing that with some other maps in the plans. You know, we're obviously showing maps where open space is, which does a great job of documenting what the uses are now. But what the future land use map enables us to do is to look down the road several years, 10 years or more, and say, yeah, we want these properties continue in that capacity in the future. It's really important that they continue to be open space. And so that would be the purpose of mapping that here as well. And what we're also recommending is that we map flood zones and aquifer protection areas, and we anticipate these areas being overlays on top of the rest of these categories that came below them. And we need to figure out, you know, how to map that so it's legible. I think we're envisioning some sort of hatch that could overlay as is currently done with the zoning map. And the value here is once again to reinforce the importance of flood protection and preserving floodplains by showing those, at the very least, the 100-year floodplain on the maps. And so we think that it's probably something, while we're not required to do that by the state, it's probably a good idea to show that on the future land use maps. And similarly would be the aquifer protection areas, of which you only have one around Lake Kenosha, to show that while we have a mixture of uses in that area, you know, part of the west side mixed use area, it falls within that area, and we know we're allowing a mixture of uses there. The overlay helps to communicate the fact that within that overlay area, there would be some restrictions on uses. And that's the value of reiterating that on this map. All right, any questions on that before I move to the next part of this exercise, I guess I'll call it? Richard, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would the identification of the medical facilities, such as the hospital and these medical complexes around town, be necessary or should be shown? I mean,
yeah, so it's a great question. You know, where do those fall in? And I think we definitely, within the institutional category, we'll definitely want to call out the hospital campus. And here, once again, with the institutional category, it's really about large campuses where there's you know, a considerable build out. It's really important part of the fabric of the area, and we definitely want to call attention to those. So I would say, if we identify beyond the hospital, if there are other really important clusters that constitute medical uses. If we want to identify those, it would probably be within that institutional class. If not, it may be that those areas either are located in a commercial corridor, or in some cases, maybe they're part of the downtown or west side. I'm not sure if there are any other properties that you were thinking of beyond the hospital itself.
It's just that it seems like there are areas of large complexes of medical facilities. Like when you look at that sand pit area and up around Germantown Road, I was just wondering whether it would be worth it to identify those areas that have these type of facilities, the medical facilities. But it was just a thought, that's all. I'm also struggling with the word institutional in terms of what you have in there as classified. I don't have a better word for it, but if I think of it, I'll let you know.
If it brings you any comfort, the term institutional is a pretty well accepted planning, land use, zoning type term for large institutions like educational institutions, civic institutions,
that's fine.
Medical institutions.
Okay. Thank you.
But no, thank you. You bring up an important point about there being other important, complexes or campuses to note other than just the hospital. So we'll look for that. Okay, let's move forward. So I want to talk, I've made a couple of references to the city's sewer service area, and you've seen this map before in one of our prior meetings where we talked about city services. And this is the core service area, which isn't to say that every parcel within this hatched area currently has sewer service, but there are mains that can basically get to every parcel within this hatched area. And this is the area that the city is committed to providing service to. So if you want to tie into the city system and you're in this area, then you'll most likely be able to do so versus being outside of this area. And
can I just interject for a sec, Francisco? So some of you know that, when we, and at the council level, Paul and Vinny, when you look at extensions for either water and sewer, we go back to the maps that are in the existing POCD, which come from public utilities and engineering and all of their planning. So this is like the cumulative outline of everything. So as Francisco said, yes, there are mains to certain areas, but no mains to other areas. It's just an area that the entire area is what the city has determined is either existing served or proposed to be served, so that somebody could extend the main and then do a bunch of hookups. Again, you look at it on an individual basis, but this is the area the city kind of thought it would be serving when it was calculating either water or wastewater needs. Right. So that's what this general outline is. So for those of you who've seen those blue and red maps, this is the outer bounds of those boundaries.
Yeah. This is almost like the boundaries of the district.
Yeah, it's a potential. There's a lot of people hooked up in there, but there's a lot of people who are not, and they may never get hooked up, especially under the system that we're using now.
Right, correct.
It's next to impossible to do a new hookup now. And we have to figure out a solution to that, because it's just, anyway. But yeah, there's a lot of potential there, but it's by no means assured.
And I'm going to show you, I'm going to move on next to the water map, and we'll overlay the two so you can see how they line up, the water service area map. The value of these maps and what I'm trying to impress upon you here is that within the future land use map that we develop, if there are any areas where we want to encourage really newer development that's of any substantial density, more mixed use areas, higher density residential, they really should be within these service areas. Okay, and it's likely that, as I described the rural residential areas before as being generally outside, many of those being outside of sewer and water service areas, it'll likely be on the blank areas on this map. Those will be largely categorized as rural residential for that reason. Okay, here's how your municipal water service lays out, and it does finger out beyond the sewer service area, but it is largely contained within the sewer service area. So there's a pretty high degree of correlation between the two. And as I already mentioned, that second bullet there kind of explains, the general approach here is to guide development as appropriate within these areas and not to direct it outside of these areas. Outside of low density residential, single family, large, medium sized, large lots that could be independent of this infrastructure. All right. Okay, now I want to start focusing in on areas where we think, based upon our mapping to date, that have real potential for accommodating, mixed use, higher density residential, commercial areas. And so in order to get there, what we did was we mapped out all of your districts that are currently commercial, industrial, mixed use, or high density residential, and that's the gray that you see there. And it really stretches along 84, along the rail corridor, and along some of the other state highways. It's not a huge swath of Danbury. So already we're focusing in. We have a lot of recommendations that we've developed to date in our plan, and also that have come out of the affordable housing plan regarding more housing development, higher density development, more mixed use, and other higher intensity land uses. And these would likely be the areas that we should be looking within the gray areas for those opportunities. Now, we want to subtract from that open space, environmental features like water bodies. So if I toggle between the two, you can see the difference, that the gray area contracts. So these are just the districts here, regardless of what type of land features are in those districts. And now we subtract out open space, parks, other protected open spaces, and water features. And it gets a little more perforated by those. So the area shrinks even more. And from that, what's left over, we see there, you can carve up, and you can carve it up into as many pieces as you like. But for our purposes, we identified 3 general areas. We have the west side, which is really the areas surrounding the Summit and the PND that's out there, the Planned Neighborhood District, and the airport greater area as part of the west side. And those potentially could be carved up into 2 separate areas as well. You have the central area, which includes the downtown and some surrounding areas. And then the east area, which is largely commercial, industrial. And that, some of those holes in between are really residential neighborhoods. And kind of medium density. So when we talked about neighborhood residential, those areas are kind of falling into that category. So we're subtracting them out of the mix because one of the clear themes from many of our discussions was the importance of preserving Danbury's neighborhoods. So we're trying to look outside of its core neighborhoods, with maybe with a few exceptions here and there. where you have a little street that's completely surrounded by commercial or industrial development, where it probably would not be too disruptive if that street were to start transitioning to some other uses. Outside of that, we want to just take all of your neighborhoods and low density residential areas out of the equation when we're looking for where the city can grow.
Francisco, I
Yep.
do think that we, and I'm going to say this before Paul jumps in because I know he's going to, just to be sure, when you're in the blue area, kind of the Deer Hill, Pleasant, some of those, you know, RE8 neighborhoods,
Yeah.
in the overlays, you know, Washington, Lincoln. I'd have to look at this on a street map to just zoom in. So that blue on the, you know, kind of sort of on the left side of Main Street, I would say, on the outer edges, might have to get scaled back. But I think we're going to look at that as we hone in on each of the areas.
So we have a lot of work to do to refine this. And what that blue area is representative of is not only did we include the downtown district and surrounding commercial districts and surrounding residential high density or high rise districts, but we also included some multifamily districts. We included some little pieces of single family districts that were otherwise totally surrounded by higher density districts. And once again, we're looking to the future. So this isn't intended to be an existing land use map. That's easy enough to do. We just label everything that's there. But we're looking to the future. And what we're doing is we're creating a framework for change. And so if you were to have an application that were to come forward within this blue area, and it's for something that's currently zoned, it's a single family small lot zone, and maybe it's a multifamily application. What we're saying with the future land use map is that you should consider opening that up to higher density residential development. And then it's still really, you still have to go through the process of rezoning, and it's still well within the commission's right to do that or not do that. But the future land use map will really guide them in that direction and point them in that direction.
Right, and conversely, making sure that we have the areas in those
and protecting
colors,
the areas that we're certain
right,
in the course of this process now that we don't feel should change.
Right.
Absolutely.
Without using the word character.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Yep.
Without using the word character.
Without using the word character.
Do not use the word character.
You know, as much as I love Zoom, this where we're at right now is one of those things where it would be great if we were in a big room with giant maps on all the walls and we were just standing around with coffee and markers just pointing out where we want to do stuff, because it's difficult mapping out the next 10 years of where we want things to. We're almost using really small symbolism here.
Yeah, we can definitely set something up to do.
Well, maybe we should. I'm a little hesitant because of COVID. I mean, the mayor's gotten it, and Tim Nolan got it.
Right.
It's like everybody's getting it, even though nobody in Connecticut has it anymore because we're below 10%. It seems like everybody's still getting it. So I'm not pushing to cram us all into a room and become a super spreader. I'm simply saying that as we enter this phase, this really is what it's all about. And Sharon, as you know, I mean, every single time you approve or petition to approve a zoning change, you mentioned that it's within the parameters of the plan of conservation and development.
Correct.
So this becomes really, this will become a linchpin upon which future decisions are going to be made. And as you rightly pointed out, that blue area is a very busy area. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. And there's a lot of constituencies in there that you know, when things begin to change, we're going to hear from. So we need to get it right. I am conservative to the point where I would say, let's just use the existing zoning map. I like what Bridgeport did. We put an addendum in there that we're going to change it. And that once it's been changed, the new zoning map should essentially become the new POCD, so the future decision can be based on where we want those things to go. It would seem counterproductive to freeze the zoning map in the POCD and then change it later and not be able to change it because we froze it in the POCD. But if there's a way to attain that kind of flexibility, which apparently Francisco mentioned Bridgeport did, I don't really have a problem with that, because at this point in 2022, I can't really figure out where we're going to put stuff in 2027. And I wouldn't want to tie the hands of the next zoning commission or a neighborhood, because I wasn't able to.
Yeah, I actually had a question about Bridgeport, Francisco, maybe you know the answer or not, but so they did their rewrite. Did the planning commission then go back and adopt that official zoning map that went along with that as the POCD map, which
that was the strategy, that was the pathway that we had identified. As to whether or not they have as of yet done that, I'm not sure, but that's what they should have done.
Right.
And so while we do these plans every 10 years, as a reminder to everyone that you can update the POCD whenever you feel you need to. The state doesn't restrict how often you can update the plans. So it is possible to update your future land use plan if you need to in the future. It's best that is not the result of an application brought forward or request for rezoning brought forward by a developer that then causes you to go back. You want to accommodate it, and that causes you to go back and update the plan, because so the metrics on that process aren't very good.
Right.
So, however, to Paul's point about our options here, I think we're all sitting in a very good position to make some very informed decisions and commit to some big ideas as to in which direction things should go and in what areas. We've certainly done our homework. I think we understand the opportunities and the issues as well as any body of individuals ever will. And I think we really have a great opportunity here to provide a framework for some future rezoning work and for future development. And I think it might be a missed opportunity if we don't do that. And I think we can do that without really tying the city's hands, without being too prescriptive or restrictive. Admittedly, there is a balance here in providing enough flexibility that the city and the commission can take the zoning actions they need to in the future that's in the best interest of the city. But I think we can accomplish that through this process. It's going to take us a couple months, right? This is not as simple as some of the other maps that we've developed and have agreed upon. But we've got the time to do it, and I think it's in our best interest to seize the moment to do it.
I don't disagree. I'm simply saying that I'm more evolutionary. I think we're going to have more transportation along Mill Plain. I think we'll have more development on the west side. I think we'll have increased density in the central district and maybe more retail on the east side. I get all that. But if we wanted to put, say, high density along the New York-New Fairfield border, I would say, wow, man, I didn't see that coming. So I get that we can map this out. I'm simply saying I'm not sure I would be comfortable with a really revolutionary big idea change, completely unlike something that's gone in the last 50 years in the city, like massive development in the South End because we'll put a new sewer line or something like that in there.
Right.
That's what would keep me up at night. Did I make the right decision? I'm tying these guys' hands, but what we have now, and I can see where we're going evolutionarily, but I'm not really that willing to take a jump. I'm only one guy here, and you guys want to do that, knock yourself out. But I would be reticent to do that. But I do take your point that we've got this chance to do this. As to your other point about, we can always do this again. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that once we do this, we're going to put it to bed for 10 years Matter of fact, we did one in 2000, and we kind of didn't really do one in 2010. We sort of did 2000.1 in 2010. This is as big or bigger as 2000. Did a giant one in 1970 where we created new industrial land. We'll never do that again. So every like generation we do a big one, and this is that one. I don't see us coming back to this for another 10 years. So I really think we got to think this through. I'm not saying that that's not what we're doing. I'm just saying this is my own personal concern that I am thinking this through properly. That's all.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, I want to walk you through these areas in more detail. And so we have some maps that show some streets and the existing zoning districts so that we can start to have some of those conversations, realizing we're not going to get it all figured out tonight. I want to at least start that discussion. And then I think what we could do is probably distribute some maps that are at a size scale that you could print and mark up as you see fit to hopefully kind of replicate that experience of being in the room together and marking up maps. And that would be very helpful to me, I know, to get some more feedback and input. But let's keep moving forward, and then we can figure out how to proceed. All right, so these focus, if you want to call them focus areas or core, future land use areas, fall almost exclusively within your sewer and water service areas. There's a lot of alignment here. So, to the concern about that this plan would advocate for expansion of sewer and water to the south to allow, more density in that area, we're clearly we're working within the parameters of your existing sewer and water service area. And I expect that we will continue to do so. We'll look within these areas that we've identified for new opportunities. All right, so I want to start with the downtown, or what's more than a downtown. It's really this central area, and this is the northern half of it. And as you could see, the thick black line is obviously the boundaries of those areas. And we basically have drawn those lines along where your commercial zones are, like the CN20, which is the real light blue, where your higher density residential zones are, such as the RH3, which is high rise residential, it's the yellow, the residential multifamily zones as well. RMF6 is the salmon color. So we've included those areas. We've included CN20 and CG20, which are both commercial districts as well. To the south, there are some small industrial zoned areas that fall within this area too. And we even have a cluster. Well, we talked about preserving RA or single family residential neighborhoods. Here we have a tiny little cluster of an RA neighborhood. It's really one street, I think, that is surrounded by CG20 commercial district, is bumped up against this I-84 to the north. And in a future land use map, it may make sense just to call out that area also as commercial or mixed use, given the fact that it's almost entirely enveloped. And that way, if you have an application that comes forward for that area, it supports you in considering expanding the uses allowed for that little area. At the same time, if you wanted to make an argument that everything that is zoned for single family residential now should be protected exactly as such, even if it's a tiny cluster surrounded by commercial development sandwiched up against I-84, let us know that too. And we need to make these maps very nuanced. We will do so.
Can I just interject for a second, just to
Please do.
give people some, locational perspective. You see the CL10 in the yellow, the big blob of yellow, it says CL10?
Right here.
Yeah, that's North Street Shopping Center. Right, Jen? I think
This
Jen-
is,
Yeah,
Ivy
that's CL10.
Ford.
This is, and just north of that is the CN20. That's Paid Narrow. That's the North Street kind of to the, if you go to the right where it says Haystown. Yeah, that's the
Easttown
North
Avenue
Street.
here.
Yeah.
This
I'm
is
just trying to
Ivy
get people's
Ford.
perspective of what you're talking
Yep.
about, where you're talking about. The big pink on Ellsworth, that's the, that is actually the cemetery, this salmon color, this big
Yep.
salmon color blob.
Which
Right,
is,
and then, and then to the
What-
right of that is the RH3, that's the hospital
it's
campus.
the hospital.
Yeah, so just so you know where we're talking about, that's all.
Which is why we exclude the cemetery for obvious reasons. It also happens to be in a RA8, which is a single family residential district.
Right.
It's a small lot residential district. So when we talked about a land use core category before being neighborhood residential, it's likely that this area would be classified as neighborhood residential. Whereas we are incorporating the hospital into this greater downtown central area. But basically what this means is everything inside these black lines is open for discussion about how it should be categorized moving forward. Right? Everything outside we think should probably stay more or less as is, and we should just kind of map them in the categories that we've developed. But everything inside, we want your feedback on. And there may be some opportunities. In some cases, we expand out a little bit to provide some more opportunities for growth. We've long talked about the downtown and the need to really expand the downtown so it has some room to grow and to allow higher density residential development in proximate to the downtown. And this is our opportunity to guide that in these maps. I've got the southern half of this on the next slide, which let's go down to that now so you can see how it all fits together. And there's the downtown. The red outline is the downtown overlay district. And you could see here is this yellow area is the RH3, which is here's your legend to the left here, high-rise residential. We have made the decision to incorporate the RMF4 into this downtown area. We could leave it out. We could consider that maybe as neighborhood residential and leave an area like that out. I know we've had a lot of conversations about the need to find places to put higher density housing in the downtown, and maybe it makes sense to bring that into this central area and open it up for consideration for higher density residential development beyond the density that's currently allowed in RMF4. And to the east as well, we incorporated RMF4, but we excluded R8 or R3, excuse me, R3.
Yeah, and some of these lines also follow, if you go back to the 2019 TOD plan, we had a really kind of big TOD area. And so, taking the opportunity to look in Francisco's team to pull it, sorry about that phone, pull it back a little bit. And so we can still, we could still have the ability to do that.
Just so I'm clear, the dotted lines, Francisco, Sharon, that's the Main Street overlay?
That is the DRZ.
Yeah,
DRZ
downtown
boundary.
revitalization.
Right,
yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
The hatched right along Main Street, which is inside that red. It's hard to see at this scale.
Yeah, it's
but
like little
that's-
V's.
Yeah,
I kind of see it, yeah.
yeah, that's the
that's-
Main Street historic overlay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, this is the official zoning map that we've drawn on top of.
got it.
And I'll just give you a few minutes to, explore a little bit. Hopefully you can see it okay. And
maybe we can figure out a way, Francisco, that we can print them and then get them to everybody so they can
Yeah,
mark them up.
absolutely.
Or if people want to come and sit down with Jen and I, either individually over the next couple of weeks, whatever, however long, which in effect would be like our own little charrettes. We could surely do that. We're willing to do that.
Yeah, my zoning map's got to be 15 years old, easy.
Well, we are in the process of, we're making a couple little changes to it, and then I'm reprinting this color one, so that then we'll go up on the website and we'll have the ability to do it. But the color actually helps because you can see what areas are what, rather than just the black line, black and white maps.
Yeah, I have one of those old, like 3 foot by 4 foot ones, but it is black and white. It's easy to see, but it is black and white.
Yeah.
so I think one of the first steps in this process would be the boundaries of this area. And once again, as I said, everything outside we're likely going to encourage and characterize as those existing land uses should continue more or less as is. Everything inside is really open for discussion as to how we categorize it. And it's probably going to be the areas we look to support expansion of mixed use areas, expansion of the downtown zoning district. Maybe
Height, when you light a building,
more
building
height
height
as well.
to get density, because where are you going? You're not going up.
Yeah.
Unless you assemble many tiny little pieces.
So the first step is that dark black line where it needs to be, right? Should it capture more? Is it capturing too much? Are there areas within there that should be excluded, protected? They should remain as is.
You're saying, just so I'm clear, you're saying that your intent or your, I guess, proposal is that within those black lines, we should consider making changes. Is that where you're going with this?
We should. Let's have, let's be open to one of the land use classes that we put forward. So in this area, should much of this area be, for example, categorized as downtown mixed use? Should a substantial part of this area be categorized as downtown mixed use, which would suggest that you can do high density residential throughout much of this area, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that on places like, because this is actually my neighborhood, George Street, Orchard. By the way, George Cherry Orchard, get it? That's surrounded by the President Streets, but anyway. They're basically single family homes in the sense they were built in the late 1800s, early 20s, that are 10, 15, 20 feet apart. There's no real way to increase density without tearing them down and rebuilding new stuff. So some of those are well established. They're not single family neighborhoods. They're multi-family neighborhoods. Those houses have been long broken up into 2s and 3s and even 4s. But going beyond where they're at now would require a transformation that would transform those pretty stable neighborhoods. So that border contains, there's a lot of stuff in that border, and some of it may be amenable to increased density. Some of it probably would not be. So if this zone was going to be monolithic, it would be tough to fit everything in there. I'm not sure that it would look much different after we figured out where we're going than it does now. Not that things wouldn't change, but you'd still have these different color blocks denoting less dense, more dense,
Right. Yeah, and this is not to suggest that this whole area we show would be one recommended category, right? But this is
I
the
don't think
area
you
we
could
want
do
to
that.
work within.
Yeah.
This is the area, right? We want to work within to maybe change, to move uses in one direction or another. And so those, we would definitely benefit from your and other people's feedback on which areas should be excluded from consideration for any sort of change, right? Which may mean shrinking the boundaries of this a little bit, excluding some areas.
Yeah, I think this is going to happen organically anyway. I mean, I think we saw that on the corner of Park Avenue and Division Street 10, 15 years ago, when there used to be a big red house, pre-existing non-conforming, it fell apart. And they built some condominiums in basically a single family neighborhood. It's never really been done before. And it's fine. It worked out great. A lot of people live there, it ramped up the density, and it fits in with the neighborhood. I think that's going to happen. I wouldn't want to prevent it from happening. I wouldn't want to do something that would preclude that kind of development. But at the same time, I would be reticent about encouraging it over the objections of people in those neighborhoods, because a lot of people moved into those neighborhoods because they looked a certain way, and that's what they like, by golly, and they want to keep it that way. So, but yeah, I mean, things change. The city is growing, and people are going to move someplace, and if that's how it rolls, that's how it rolls. Is there a way to do that, sort of allowing it without encouraging it or without forcing it?
Well, the future land use map doesn't force anything upon the city or the commission. It's a guide, and which is to say that if we were to identify an area, that bottom corner, as higher density residential, it doesn't compel the Planning and Zoning Commission to get to work in redrafting the zoning regulations to allow for higher density residential.
Yeah, no, I have that. But if somebody came along with a petition to change it to higher density, and that change conformed with our POCD,
correct,
and we rejected it, we could be potentially facing a court case. So my question really is there a way to acknowledge density will be increasing without having us wind up in court because we disallowed the petition?
Yes, we could develop a class, a land use category class with its own unique color that it describes something like transitional area, or and we could basically describe what it is that you're describing, that the area and the zoning for that area should accommodate marginally denser land uses that are compatible with the neighborhood. So basically what we're saying is that we don't want to freeze this area in time, that it should be open to some change, evolution. It's acceptable for that to move towards slightly higher density. And at the same time, what we don't want is for, a row of houses to be torn down and a big tower to go up next to single family houses. So we can describe that. We can create a category for that, describe exactly what our intent is, and identify and map that out. We can do that.
Okay. Because I can tell you, if you door knocked on Jefferson or Washington or Pleasant and propose that we increase density, they just shoot you right on the front porch and claim self-defense. So it's not, they wouldn't go for it. But if it happened organically, a house burned down or it fell apart or something like that, or the thing was pretty enough or whatever, then it happens. It's how cities grow.
Okay, got it. All right, any other questions or comments? We do have the whole west side and then the east side areas to review as well. And once again, we'll
Yeah, we may not get through all of this in one in the rest of this meeting
Yeah.
either, so.
Yeah,
Right.
and I just kind of make a comment back to Paul's sort of original
Yeah.
suggestion. I think I'm with him on the potentially needing to be sort of in the room. I mean, this obviously is going to take, many conversations. But to your point earlier, Francisco, about how sort of critical this whole aspect is to the entire POCD, I think time well spent is going to be necessary. And, Sharon, you kind of put it out like a charrette type of format. I'm not against that. I actually think that might be a healthy exercise, particularly given sort of the opportunity that we have here. So I would sort of put my hand up to lobby for some sort of in-person component as well too, if that's something that's of the interest to the commission.
Okay.
Sure, why don't we see if we can, come up with various options and see, I'll talk to Francisco offline and see how we best can coordinate something that we could really, sit around and talk about and look at it and stare at it and be able to read, and understand the various neighborhoods. So,
Yeah, this
and
is
that
obvious.
it goes across the board, not just for this area, but it's
Right,
the west
exactly.
side, it's the east side.
Yeah, this is obviously a lot of information, especially for somebody who really hasn't studied zoning before, such as myself. Obviously, you and Paul, Sharon, you and Paul have been looking at these maps and understand the impact of any change because you've been in situations where there has been. So I really need to study this more to have any voice in what goes on here. So I'm for additional conferencing on this.
Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Okay.
All right, so let's keep moving forward. And our intention today is really to introduce you to the beginning of this process. It's not to make any hard decisions as to, exactly how we're going to proceed or whether or not these lines are in the right place. It's to let you know where we're at and how it is we need to move forward. Okay. All right, the east side. The east side's got a lot of big industrial and commercial districts. And here we have Federal Road that cuts right through here at the center to help orient you. We're obviously at the eastern edge of town. These light green districts down here are industrial, IG 80 general industrial districts, so a large share of this area.
That's for everybody. Sorry, Francisco, that's like Plumtree, that's a landfill. Get your bearings. And this is Plum Trees Road down at the bottom, just to the left of where it says IG 80, that little horseshoe shape. That's the bend in the road on Plum Trees as you get to Newtown. So Public Works is on the left, Tim,
Right.
to orient. Go ahead. So
the blue areas are CG 20. We have some IL 40, which is your light industrial. It's the purple. And incorporated here, we're incorporating RH3, some limited RH3, which is your high-rise residential. Here is where the hospital is. That was captured in the central area that we already showed you. That meets up against this eastern area here. And then all this surrounding residential is RA 40, RA 80, so we exclude those areas. Also excluded is RA 20 here that is kind of tucked into these commercial and industrial areas. Do the general limits of this area make sense, though, in the way we're not including RA 40 or RA 20 districts, because these are all well-established neighborhoods. We're pretty much keeping to where we have industrial, commercial, and higher density residential areas. And there is more of this to the south, which I have on the next slide. So let me go to that now so you can see the rest of this. And we have a donut hole in the middle of this, and that is the RA 8 area, or R3 maybe, yeah, R3. And here we have a mixture, so it's a lot of IL40, IG80, some multifamily residential districts. We included RMF10, some RMF4 areas.
Again, the RA 20 is the cluster on across from Shelter Rock School. That's the yellow on the opposite side of it.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it, where what's his name lives. Anyway, yeah, that's right on the corner of Shelter Rock. And then as you go down the hill, on the right is Woodland, and then on the left in the pink is just, again, bearings, Arlington Woods, as you go down towards Palm Trees.
Yeah, excuse me. Francesca or Sharon, this is completely new to me. I've never had the occasions to work with any of these maps. Would it be possible to put like little notations or landmarks, as you're saying here and currently describing, on the map, so you can get, a novice like myself can get an idea as to where in the city we are?
Yeah.
You know, just
Yeah,
a little
as discussed, we'll distribute these maps to you, and we can add some landmarks to help you orient. If these are printed at the right scale, and we can get these to you at a PDF too that you can zoom in on, you'll also be able to zoom in on the street names and read them for orientation. But we could put some landmarks, like some of the schools and other landmarks, to help you orient yourself.
And I do like, the suggestion that Paul made in terms of getting, at a certain time, getting together as a group to look at this and talk about it. I think it brings together, as we're doing now, conversations and pros and cons on one's opinion or recommendation to do it. And if we had a facility where you had a nice large screen and can do this, I think that would be good at a time when, this COVID situation seems like it would allow us to do that.
This is Perry. I would be in favor as well, for sure. Just wanted to add my 2 cents. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
I don't know that area really well. I mean, I'm not an expert on there, but I do know, because I've heard from transplants that they're pretty chagrined about the lack of sidewalks on the collector roads like Plum Trees to Newtown Road and things like that. There aren't any, and they find themselves sort of nonplussed about walking, down the gutter to get their coffee in the morning as they head over to Boston Chicken or something, if that's even still there. So anytime you see those little boxes denotating, connotating, higher density neighborhoods, I think it behooves us to say, look, we got to get going on the sidewalks. The idea was every time they built something new, we would get a sidewalk, but that didn't quite happen. And I think we need a plan, like we need a plan on how to hook people up to sewer lines, about how we're finally going to build sidewalks, even in existing neighborhoods, if the circumstances, demand it. And I think there's in the particular area that's on the screen now, there's several areas that really do need them, and the people want them.
Yeah, Boston Market's still there, but Blockbuster is not. Right.
Say again?
So
you can get your chicken. He said you can get your chicken.
Okay, well, that's good.
Not the movie.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, point taken, in addition to development, there is the way that this can act to guide infrastructure.
Capital improvements, right?
Yeah, capital
Funding for
improvements,
capital improvements.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, let me go on to the west side, just so you have a good look at that. And here we include, and this is half of it, this is the left half of it. All of that dark purple area is the PND zone, which includes the summit and some surrounding developments. That is mostly surrounded by light industrial, the IL-40, which is the lilac color. Above that is the CA80, which is arterial commercial, and much of that is actually occupied by I-84. That's the peach color. The green color within the boundaries is RMF 10, it's residential multifamily. And you'll notice we exclude on the south side along the Ridgefield border, we exclude that neighborhood, which is RA 40. Now, going back, I think it was Paul that made an earlier comment about how the west side of the city is likely to change, and maybe that's where some opportunities are in the future. And we know that the Maybrook line concept is moving forward. The city's fortunate to have some funding to do some more planning work related to that and in support of it. I think we also understand that even if that project does move forward and as rapidly as it possibly could, it'd probably take 10 years for that to be built out. So I'm not sure we have to get in front of that idea now and be prescriptive about land use on the west side because there's no certainties around it. And even if it does move forward, it'd probably be another 10 years and likely something that the city can address and cover in the next iteration of this plan.
I think you're right. The price tag is so stratospheric that,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be a blindly optimistic to think that we're going to get that ever, let alone within the next 10 years. Some
Right.
people say that, hey, there's so much money floating around from Washington, it's going to happen. I'm not so sure. The last price I heard was $850 million. I mean,
Wow. Yeah.
from White Street to, you could pay everybody to take an Uber and it would be cheaper than that. If you take a limo, it'd be cheaper than that. But anyway,
Yeah.
it's just infrastructure costs in this country are impossible to even fathom.
Yep.
But anyway.
Okay, and let me go pan now to the eastern half of this, which includes the airport. The blue towards the center there is the mall and surrounding properties, which is CG20. I think we all know that's a property that's in transition. So we might have an opportunity here to provide some guidance and framework for potential future of that area. This area is mostly that purple is IL-40, right, which includes the airport and a lot of surrounding properties that are industrial in nature and are derivative of or contribute to the airport's operations. We did include residential multifamily areas that are north of 84 for consideration, because those are surrounded by neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods. So we want to revisit those areas to ensure that the land uses are as they should be. And in not all cases, just because we're suggesting that we look at an area or a district and maybe chart a course for its future that's a little different than it is now, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's higher density. It may be that we advocate for something that is lower density in an area that is currently zoned for multifamily. It may be that it makes sense and we take a position that those areas, if not substantially built out right now, even if they're zoned for multifamily, maybe they should be small lot, single family, or neighborhood residential, whatever it may be. So this does not necessarily imply that everything is moving towards higher density. It just suggests that we should review these areas and consider whether or not they should change or remain the same.
Yeah, and
Again,
there's still available land up on Spruce Mountain where you could build more of the same, or maybe PJ's neighborhood, he knows it pretty well. But there's still a couple of lots up there.
Yeah, and again, for orientation, see that green kind of in the middle, that's O&G.
Right.
Across from.
And up
Yeah.
here is the West Side campus, West Side campus right here.
Right.
This is their
Right.
access. And that's all the maps I have for you. What we will do is we'll take these maps, break them up in some pieces that you could print out at a legible scale. We'll get it to you as a PDF that you could zoom in on and pan around with. That'll afford you an opportunity to just be able to digest this a little more. Once again, these boundaries that we put on the map are just our first cut suggestion as where to focus and where to first look for opportunities. It may very well be there are areas outside of these black lines that you think are good candidates for some sort of change, whether they should be directed towards lower density or maybe higher density. So please feel free to call out other areas that are worthy of consideration. We're just trying to direct our efforts, and these areas are where we start. All right, any other questions or comments? We're about 13 minutes shy of 6 o'clock, and I do have a 6 o'clock meeting I have to jump onto. So for my purposes, I need to wrap up, and this is really our last mapping slide.
No, I think as we said before, let you and I have some discussions about this. We'll test how the maps print and things like that. And that way, if we send them to you in a PDF and you want to zoom in, but you want a hard copy, and you want us to print them out, we'll come up with some schemes or some options to meet in person, and we'll go from there in the next one.
Right.
Great.
Okay, so our remaining schedule, and we're going to rework this a little based upon your interest in being able to meet in person. We'll take a look at when and how we can make that happen. Next month, our team will continue to work on these maps in addition to getting you some copies for your use. We will start to put together some ideas as to how the maps should look like, which means starting to apply some of those categories that we reviewed. And just to put it in front of you as an idea that we could go back and forth on. And I expect that it's going to remain a work in progress through the course of the summer, and it may not be until September that we really commit to a map. So at our July meeting, we could talk about this again. By our next meeting as well, we have been working towards our implementation plan, and now I think we're all agreed on the goals and strategies, so we can now assemble that into a table and start. Sharon, as she discussed, has distributed that to departments. We can start to assign responsible parties and priority levels. I expect we can have that ready for our July meeting, so we'll share that with you and put that in front of you. We could discuss that. By August, we anticipate having a draft of the plan first cut of it all pulled together with all the sections complete and potentially a draft future land use map. If it's not ready yet, then we'll just put a placeholder in the document for that. But we want to get something that we could share with the Planning Commission at large, with council and with Westcog for review, with the intention of receiving feedback from them that we can discuss in September to make decisions as needed to agree upon any revisions that may have been requested. And that still puts us on schedule to file a plan for public review in October, which would allow for a public hearing for adoption in November. We don't have to adopt it by November, but we're still on a schedule that will allow us to do that right now.
Francisco, you know, we're
Yes.
talking about industrial here and higher density there and whatnot. Is it also appropriate to imagine certain types of industry, like does Danbury want server farms, for instance? I mean, not that we're going to get them because our price of electricity is so high, but is that appropriate for a POCD, or is that more downstream after the POCD has been put together?
It is appropriate. By identifying industrial areas, it allows, it would allow for that. Now, it would, if you wanted to target a certain type of industry, it would be best to call that out within the plan. And
It would be to put it actually in the plan.
If we have consensus around that idea to pursue a specific type of industry, I mean, we do have some very specific land use type economic. I think that we likely want to cover that ground in the economic development section of the plan.
Okay.
So if we have consensus around a specific type of industry that the city should be receptive of, open to, and accommodating within its industrial districts, I think that would fit within the economic development section, and in which case we would probably recommend that type of business, that the industrial zoning districts allow for that type of use. And then by virtue of the fact we've identified in what sort of districts that's allowed and what that is really compatible with, then the future land use map would be representative of that in the areas that we map as industrial.
It did happen before. We transitioned from hats to electronics, and we did it successfully. So there is some precedent in Danbury for that.
Right.
That was done deliberately. It wasn't organic. I mean, they said, look, we got to do something about hats. Let's go with the 8-track tapes and capacitors, and and it happened.
Right.
It saved the city.
Okay. All right. So our schedule is, we're getting very close, believe it or not. It has been a tremendous amount of work. We still have a lot of work to do within our last few months here, but we're on track. And our next steps, as I mentioned, is to develop that implementation plan, to develop a first cut of the future land use map, continue development of the plan document. And our next meeting is 4 weeks away, that being Tuesday, July 19th at 4 p.m.
Great, thank you,
Okay.
Francisco. Yeah.
Sure.
So let us do our work, everyone. We'll get back to you with all the best way to get this information to you, and/or convene in small groups, one big group. We'll get some options together. I'll talk to Francisco about his schedule as well.
Yeah.
And then we'll just keep in touch. And again, during the course of the month, if there's questions that come up, just feel free to give myself or Jen a call at the office. So I think that's it. We'll let Francisco jump off. Thank you so much again for all this work. And I will.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. 5:54. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? I think we still have a quorum here.
So moved. Motion to
Second.
adjourn. Second.
Okay,
Either
motion by
one.
Perry, seconded by Tim. Did I hear? Or Rich? Rich Dinelli. We'll give it to him. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Be in touch.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
you.
Bye. Oh.